delighted with my guest today, who is founder and former owner of The Tab, a news media business he launched in 2009 with two friends when he was just 21 and a student at Cambridge. It started out as Cambridge University's online tabloid, promising, in their words, to provide fast news and entertainment direct to your rooms. Fun and fresh, it set out to give students a chance to share rather sensationalist stories from campus. Early on, it made national headlines with Tab Totty, which showcased scantily clad even Cambridge University students, and an April Fool surrounding former leader BNP Nick Griffin, amongst many others. So students were loving it. So Jack and his mates quickly started rolling it out across every uni in the UK. Then in 2015, they stepped up a gear and launched in the US, setting up an office in Brooklyn. They instantly started breaking stories like the Dartmouth Black Lives Matter protest and uncovering where President Obama's daughter was attending college. These guys were seriously rocking, even setting up a spin-off called Babe in 2016, which was aimed at women. And then they went on to secure a $6 million in funding from News Corp. Jack was noted by The Guardian as one of 30 people under 30 to watch and was named as one of London Evening Standard's Power 1000 in 2013. Ooh, Jack. But it was all plain sailing and plaudits. There have been controversies to deal with, as well as challenges of running such a fast-growing business on both sides of the pond, the travelling, managing staff, financials, etc. In Jack's words, like so many other digital media companies of our era, we struggled with the really crucial bit, converting it all to profit. So in 2018, he decided it was time to get out and sell the business, but this was not easy and took 2 stressful years. So much so that Jack has recently written about this in an article, Lessons from a Grueling 2 Years Selling My Company. Gosh, brutally frank and honest, it is also an education for anyone in business. So Jack, again, thank you so much for being on with Tracy today. I have to admit, I've got a bit of and anyone listening, I've got a bit of a sort of imposter syndrome. Because Jack's the journalist and has been doing this, and I'm playing at it. But anyway, I'm sure he'll guide me through this. So Jack, the first thing, I mean, there's so much has happened, obviously, since your days at Cambridge. But I wondered if you could start by telling us what inspired you to set up the Tab in the first place.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Tracy. I enjoyed listening to that bio. I felt like I was on Desert Island Discs, hearing my story back. Not sure I've quite reached that stage, but very honoured to be on here. Thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, obviously my career is still, I like to think, a pretty short one so far. And we started the Tab at Cambridge. Myself and 2 friends, we were writing for the other student paper, which was like a sort of very serious-minded print paper where people would share their opinions about the situation in the Middle East, or their advice to the Prime Minister on policy. And we realized pretty quickly that no one was reading what we were writing because it wasn't really saying anything new. It was, with all due respect, a bunch of people who knew very little about the world giving their opinions. So we wanted to start something that was really much more about like the student bubble, the people, the personalities, and the stories that were happening there. And I think I always had this makes me sound really Stone Age, but at the time certainly wasn't such an unfashionable approach. I really liked the tabloid style. They've had a pretty awful 10 years and they weren't great before, but basically we wanted to do something really immediate and jokey and populist, and so the tabloid style was a great fit. So we came up with this idea of the Tab, which is a pun, because Cantab is someone from Cambridge, and tabloid.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, it's a pun that most people will never appreciate, because it works for about 12,000 people who were there at the time. But yeah, we did it in Cambridge, and look, obviously there was an element of 21-year-olds wanting to be, cause a splash and be a bit controversial. So we kind of hammed that side of it up. and we launched it at the end of our second year of uni, and did some like aggressive flyering and stuff, and it was super popular from day one. Like I think on the first day we had 10,000 people reading it, which, you know, there's like 12,000 students at Cambridge. Yeah, I think we picked up a lot of people who live around there or whatever. It's probably just my mum hitting refresh. But yeah, I mean, it did at Cambridge what we set out to do, which we got a big audience consistently, and we wound a lot of people up. And the editorial formula was just to do a lot of breaking news and a lot of stories that the student papers wouldn't have touched. Like I remember one of our early stories, an academic punched a student in a kebab shop, which to us was like the best story imaginable, but all the other student papers thought was sort of beneath them. So it was a lot of that. And yeah, a few stunts that were really just attention seeking. It was fun.
Your comment, actually, that's quite interesting. Your comment about saying some people thought that was, or other newspapers or whatever, you thought that was beneath them. Do you think that's because you kind of, Cambridge had that kind of like, we wouldn't write about anything like that, and you kind of sort of saw that gap, really?
Yeah, I thought when we were doing it, I thought it was a Cambridge thing because people do take themselves really seriously. Yeah. But having subsequently taken the tab to like 100 other unis in the UK and the US, it's a student paper thing. And it's by no means everyone, and there are loads of really great people doing it, but they tend to attract people who want to be the leader writer for the Financial Times, you know, and those people also maybe don't appreciate, I see this in a lot of young journalists, including ourselves originally, they think that the way to become one of those journalists is to just copy those articles, whereas in fact, the best way is to go out and break real stories and do some original reporting, which, you know, that's the kind of high-minded part of what we were doing. The tabloid part is the kind of trashy bit. But yeah, I mean, like the student papers at Cambridge were very self-serious. Like I remember the main one was called Varsity, and they used to say that every Friday a copy of Varsity drops on the editor of the Times desk, which is like definitely not true, because we had the editor of the Times on the tabs board in the end, and I don't think she'd heard of it. Varsity. And I remember when we started, they really hated us, but they didn't want to give us the kind of oxygen of publicity. So Varsity had a sign on the wall that said "Policy on the tab, don't mention the tab," and it was like highlighted in orange. So like, yeah, there was definitely a culture clash that we took advantage of, and there was definitely also an element of like, there was a bit of an irony of Cambridge having a tabloid, which the national press really liked when we did stories that they could pick up. But people like good stories. That's kind of why it worked well at Cambridge. It's a bubble, and there are a lot of good stories.
Yeah, totally. So I'm busy, tell everyone, you know, who I work with, who's setting up a business or have set up a business, that they need a business plan. Did you guys ever do any of that, or did you just kind of think this is what we're going to do and just roll with it?
Yeah, there were basically two stages to what we do. There was like the Cambridge bit, which was one of the most fun bits actually, because totally new. That was when we were students, and for that it was like very on the hoof. Like I think we literally just spent all our time trying to get people to write for us and follow us, which actually would be my advice to someone doing the same thing again. It's like spend all your time on marketing. But then after university, we launched it at a couple more unis, and then we did do a big business plan because we were raising investment. And I think when you're raising investment, you need that. Because you can't expect people to just take it on trust. So we did that. My co-founder, George, he did most of the first business plan. It was like a big old book. It was detailed.
Or at least he had a go at it.
No, it was seriously good. I remember it was like very detailed. It was really good.
So it started to gain traction reasonably, well, quickly. You obviously had a lot of readers. At what point did you go, oh, right, I think we'll roll this out to another university? And then as it rolled out even more, so it's kind of a two-stage question, really. How did that make you feel? Did you ever think, whoa, this is really moving quickly? Or did you always feel quite in control of every stage?
I think the Cambridge bit at the beginning was the moment I felt most like, whoa, because you're going from nothing, and that was like a really quick take up, albeit in a small bubble, but that was our world at the time.
Yeah.
I think later on, I mean, I graduated from uni. We'd done it, and I wanted to be a journalist on a national newspaper. So I did a journalism degree where they like really indoctrinate you in the kind of, they basically convince everyone that they want to get onto the Daily Mail grad scheme, which is insane now that I know what that would entail. Can't think of anything worse, but I really wanted to do that. And I remember I had a final round interview for it. And meanwhile, George was the one who really wanted to, who saw the potential for it as a business. And then Tamar, our other co-founder, kind of said, look, I enjoyed it at uni, but I want to do something else. So George was really driving it forward. He got it going in Durham, Durham and UEA, and then basically was persuading me all the time that, you know, stop trying to work at the Daily Mail and do this. This will be way more fun. And I got a job at the Evening Standard that I've been doing for like 6 months, which was night shifts, literally like real scummy journalist stuff, going and banging on people's doors when something awful's happened to them at like 11 p.m. on a Sunday night. Really interesting. I enjoyed it a lot, but it was also not what you want to do forever. And George basically persuaded me, look, in your spare time, let's try and get this going. And then if we get an investment offer, let's do it. You know, you're going to, at that point, you need to decide and join me. And we got that offer. I'm still not that up for it. I don't really know why. I was skeptical about it working elsewhere. Our old sort of team at Cambridge were really anti us expanding anywhere. So we kind of had that to deal with. And that put me off a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, like we weren't going to call it the Tab because they were so uptight about it.
Ooh.
Absolute, yeah, distraction. But mainly I was like, no, I want to be I want to be covering crime in Tottenham on a Sunday night. Anyway, when we got the investment offer, I sort of realised actually it'd be a lot more fun to do this. Quit the Evening Standard thing and did that properly. And yeah, I guess from there, like there are definitely stages where things are going really well and you think, wow. But I think we felt quite in control. I don't know, it's weird. Like this is a business that never really made money. It was really driven forward by other people's investment cash. So like those moments you are like, wow, this is going really well. But I don't know, like increasingly as it went on, it felt like the cash was kind of artificially generating growth rather than anything organic, which maybe is skipping ahead a bit.
No, that's really interesting. I was also going to ask you, you know, a lot of people that go into business, you know, and especially if you're going in with someone else, you know, it's making sure you've both got, well, first of all, different skill sets. So you're not trying to do the same thing. But also, I always wonder how that delegation of responsibility, you know, who's doing what. I mean, from the sound of it, sounds like that kind of naturally happened with George perhaps driving the business and you doing the marketing. I don't know, how did that work? Did you consciously think about that?
Well, we should have thought about it more, I think. I mean, he was the CEO, so he was ultimately in charge, but I think because of how we started it, I never properly appreciated that. So we never had that thing of being like, you're my boss. And we're best friends. I mean, I was the best man at his wedding. So I don't know, I think if I was doing it again, I would say that he should have more of the final say, which is a weird thing to say. I mean, I ultimately took over from him as CEO, but for the first 4 years as a business, I was the editor and we made a lot of decisions together. Marketing was something we did together. And it worked really well because we were really close. But I think my philosophy is that like you need a final decision maker and it should be one person. Which I probably didn't understand when it wasn't me.
I think what's amazing about your story and what you're sharing is something that happened when you were young, but it was quite organic. You know, it was something that you did and you loved, and it was opportunity. And then it was suddenly, oh, this could be a bigger opportunity than we realised. And I speak to a lot of people, and I think sometimes they do see it. They don't quite understand how actually you need to feel quite structured in the beginning, because otherwise it can go like that. And some things that perhaps you haven't thought about do kind of quickly creep up behind, like, oh, I should have really thought about that. And now am I in too deep or you know, and so
I think there are stages, like when you're a few people, you can, I mean, even when you're under 10, you can basically get by with just like going on the hoof. You need a plan and stuff. But in terms of communication and like responsibilities and stuff, you can be super flexible, and then it really changes. I mean, by the end, we were in different countries and had a lot of, I think we had 50 people at peak. And yeah, I think then you need a radically different approach. But like early on, when you're under 10 people, the whole or 80% of the thing is just getting customers, right? So I'm always reluctant to, I'd be reluctant again, and I am in my new venture, reluctant to do anything, put too much structure in that's just going to get in the way of getting customers, because that is literally the only thing that matters.
Yeah. I guess when I mean structure, I think sometimes it's just some ground, like foundations, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know, just some simple things to start with, because you just know you're
going to... we lacked that, I think. We could have used more of that from day one.
So you went from the UK into the US. Now that was a massive step. How did that actually happen, and how did you feel and cope with that? Because I think going international is a big step for a lot of people. You know, think, God, how do I? They want to do it, but it's a bit like, oh, that's quite a leap.
Yeah, I think it was a mistake, obviously, in terms of how things panned out. We should have stayed in the UK and just tried to build like a reasonably profitable business there. Like when we went to the US, we were just starting to break even. Things were going well. I mean, we didn't have a clue how to do more in the UK. We were just too inexperienced, but the conditions were decent. And I think if we started with that, we might have had like a nice small business that, well, who knows what would have happened. But we went to the US because it's a huge market, obviously. And, you know, for students, there's 20 million students in the US, there's 2.5 million in the UK. So it's like 10 times the size. I mean, I subsequently learned that actually the number of students who live on a campus are aged under 25 and doing a full 4-year course is only like 5 million. So it's only twice the size of the UK. That's the sort of question I wish we'd answered before we'd gone.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. But basically we hit a fork in the road in 2015 where we had really good penetration in the UK. There were no more universities really to hit. Revenue was growing. We didn't have a great idea of how to do that. We weren't great at revenue. So it was like, what's your growth plan? And we were like, well, the US seems the obvious move. And we kind of, at the same time, we raised 2 million quid from a venture capital fund. And yeah, I mean, the only vision we had of how to use that money well was to go to the US. So we did. And we went I remember we decided to do it, and then we literally went like a week later. It was all like this. I look back at how we did it, and it was really odd. Like we literally told a couple of staff with a day's notice that they were moving to the US, and got an office. I don't know. The US is a difficult place to sort of set up first. If I was doing the US again, I would have sent like one person or none and just visited, you know, and done it all from the UK. Like we must have taken on so much cost getting an office and hiring 20 people. I mean, it was great learning. It was the wrong approach, but it was really fun and a great learning. And then we just like really tried to hammer US growth. So we launched on like 150 campuses in that year after 2015, and got like some good signs, but really it was pretty clear early on that we weren't getting what we had in the UK. Like in the UK, there were sort of 15, 20 universities where there was a really good tab team. People knew us, you know, like across the campus.
Yeah.
And there were kind of good stories in the US. There were good people. There was the old good team in the old campus where we were sort of dominating more, but it just wasn't the same. And the brand definitely didn't work as well.
I'll ask you about that
maybe
whole sort of tabloidy thing. I mean, I know they read kind of tabloidy, sort of trashy papers and stuff, but they don't read it in the same way as we do they?
No. Yeah, I don't know. It's such a contradictory place. They certainly don't read it that way at Harvard, is what I learned. Maybe they do elsewhere. I remember like we used to have this thing, you go and visit university, you have your like people who have applied to write for you, and we'd have this like booklet of stories, and I or whoever was the sort of lead journalist there would talk them through the stories to be like, these are the kind of stories we like and here's how to find them. And I remember like, you know, goes down pretty well at any UK university. Like people don't take themselves too seriously, they're kind of relaxed. I remember doing it at Harvard. And just like going through this book of stories, and I can't remember what the stories were, but they were just like so tabloid, because you're trying to get people into kind of the most tabloidy ones so they have a bit of a grounding. And I just remember looking up around this room of Harvard students, just blank faces, unsmiling, just baffled by what I was talking about. So like we got the vibe wrong with those Ivy League places. And like I remember there were a couple where there was like immediately a sort of protest against us and people saying we were disgusting for like really innocuous stories that were just a bit jokey. But then other kind of big state universities, we actually went down much better, because I think just culturally they're more relaxed people and they're bigger. Because that kind of Cambridge self-serious spirit, if you thought it was serious at Cambridge, it was the Ivy League schools, it was like 10 times. So that was a bit of a learning. I'd probably do the brand differently if I was going and doing the whole thing again. But I think really the learning was, we took on all this investment, and the theory went from being like, we have a specific tone of voice and style, and we think that works really well with a section of students. That was sort of the tab philosophy from Cambridge all the way up to like 2015. And then we raised the money, and it was like, well, we need a bigger vision, because we're talking about, being $1 billion company and all this crap. So then the strategy became like, can we actually be like a platform for anyone who wants to be a journalist to come and write? And can we use tech to do that by like taking someone on this journey? So we have this like 6-person tech team in London costing like an eye-watering amount of money. And we were signing up like tens of thousands of American students to write for us. And the outcome was quality became really low. There was a bit more competition in the US anyway. Like the student papers are serious, but they were much, much better than we've seen in the UK.
Yeah.
And so you had that competition. You had us basically like pushing our bar for quality way lower to try and just get loads of quantity. And the end result was just like a really diluted product, I guess, where we hit, I think our peak audience was 11 million a month, which was really good. The tab now does about 5 million. But when we arrived in the US, we were doing 3, I think. So like we had some good growth from that. We published some good scoops. Like I remember we outed a senator for what was he doing? He was like sexting. It was some very tabloid thing, like sexting young boys and then condemning gay people in his church services. That kind of hypocritical politician type cracking story. I can't remember the detail. I hope I haven't just libeled him. So, I
mean, going to that then, I mean, in your journalistic career inside with the tab and outside the tab, are there any particular great stories that you've kind of uncovered or written about that you could share with us?
Yeah, my favorite one, I think, is I did for the Evening Standard. The 50 Shades of Grey author E.L. James she was getting huge when she was not that big in the UK. She was getting huge in the US, like really, really big. And she was anonymous. And I worked out who she was, her real identity. And I went to her house. I was sent there by the editor, I should say, by the news editor. I went to her house on like a Sunday evening and was just knocked on the door and was like, E.L. James? And she was like, oh my God, how did you know? And then we did a story the next day being like, this is the person behind this. Because by then she was making millions. It was like a blockbuster. So that was fun. It's probably considered quite poor taste now. But
did she talk?
Yeah, well,
she shut the door on you.
I mean, she was basically like, oh, I can't believe this. How did you find me kind of thing. And then maybe she gave me one quote. And then she did an interview with a magazine like a year later, and it was telling the story of how her identity had been revealed. And she said, I was doorstepped in my London home, and then she said, he looked about 12, and that was me, because I did used to look extremely young for my age, pre-beard. So that was quite good, because I could prove it was her. And I had a front page story. What was it? I don't think it was that interesting. It was like a politics story, but you just get lucky with these. And I actually had another front page story where the Standard sent me undercover to train as a security guard for the Olympics when it was in London, because it was that summer. And I'd already left the Standard as doing the tab. I got like guilt trips by the news desk into doing it for them. So I did it. And basically the security test was like unbelievably stupid and basic. It was like, smell 2 glasses, one had petrol and one had water. And it was like, which one has a smell? I actually failed the eye test. But anyway, I passed, and they kind of gave me the highest rank just based off being able to smell a cup. And the Standard did like a big front page being like, terror threat or whatever. So that was fun. And we had some good ones to the tab as well. I'm trying to think of any classics.
Okay, so let's just move on then. So you started traveling back and forth from the UK to the US. That must have been quite challenging. And then obviously as the business was growing and you were finding that maybe it wasn't as easy in the US as it had been in the UK. At what point, I mean, how were you feeling at that point? I mean, were you stressed? Were you just thinking, I'm just going to go with the flow? How did you kind of start?
Yeah, I never, the flying at first feels really glamorous. That's probably the wrong word, but it's exciting. And you're kind of like, you do it so often that you get to go in a lounge and eat like disgusting food they convince you as a perk. But then that started to wear really thin after probably a year and a half. Like I got really sick of it, and then it became such a drag because for most of the 3 years we were in the US, I was probably flying every 2 weeks. It was just like, jet lagged a lot, boring, like flights a lot. So that was kind of crap. In terms of kind of stress, I think basically for the first year we were in the US, I was still the editor-in-chief and I still had George, and I think he basically soaked up a lot of the stress. We were running out of money. We had to do another fundraise in 2016, which is when we got Murdoch. But that period was like quite shaky. We had to do a lot of layoffs in early 2016, and then it got like press attention. That was quite stressful, but I never felt too bad. And then when I took over from George left in 2016, right after we did that fundraise, and I took over as CEO. And that was really chilled for about 18 months because we had loads of money in the bank and things went really well for a year and a half. We grew loads, revenue like trebled or quadrupled. But then basically for the whole final 2 years from late 2017 until I guess actually 2020, so 3 years, that was pretty stressful. That was the most stressed I've been for sure. So that was the kind of crescendo. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, when you're making a loss but you got a lot of money in the bank, it's quite relaxed, and then when it comes time to get the money again, it's pretty stressful.
So George left, you took over as CEO, and then at what point then, Jack, let's get on to the whole, getting to the point where you wanted to sell the business and the whole process of selling the business, which is obviously the article that you've written about recently. Which I think is great, because I think so many people are not great because it was so stressful for you. I don't mean that one. I think, having been part of a business before that has sold, it's stressful regardless. It's a major undertaking when you do it, I think. So I think it'd be great if you could tell us a little bit about that, because I think it's probably a stage in everyone's business where they want to get to, but don't quite know what that's going to entail and if they can get to it, So it would be great.
I basically I shut the US at the end of 2018 because it was just burning money, and we were running out of money. It was clearly not going anywhere, and it was burning a lot. So I closed that, and I came back, and I was like, okay, probably want to sell this now. I'd kind of explored the idea a few months earlier, but anyway, I decided I wanted to do it. I had one shareholder who was offering to basically help me do it because he had a background in selling the company. So we went for it, and I mean, I nearly left. I was just ready to do something else, by that point. The US had closed, the dream was over. I knew we weren't going to sell the business for as much money as we'd taken in investment, and it was going to be hard. But I kind of got persuaded to see it through by, various shareholders who just said, if you don't, then maybe it won't sell. And, obviously there's some money in it for you. So I decided to do it, and I thought this will take 6 months max. And it took, how long did it take? I mean, 2 years? Yeah, I think possibly a bit longer. It was sort of March 2019 until about 2 years in total. Sorry. Anyway, so I started the process. I think my biggest learning, by the way, at that point is don't suddenly arrive one day and think, oh, maybe I'll sell the company. Never really thought about this before. It's something I would definitely think about every 6 months or so from the beginning. And really the thing you're thinking about is, who is the potential buyer? How well do I know them? Because I arrived on it in March 2019, and or even a bit before, and I was thinking, who are my potential buyers? I don't really know most of these people. Had News Corp, which was a shareholder, and I've been trying to get them to buy it for about 6 months before, but they were basically saying, we need to see what other people think, that thing. You need competition to get interest. So I then drew up a list with David, my shareholder, who was helping me, and basically emailed these people cold, and that's just so much worse. Some of them never heard of us. The ones who had no relationship with me. You just don't have a relationship. And to be honest, we were already going into the process with one hand tied behind our back because we'd had a shit 3 years or so, maybe 2 years. So, it was obvious why we were selling, and that was a weakness. That was going to be reflected in the price, and that was fine. But not even knowing these people, it made the whole thing take longer. And I'd say, obviously, since I wrote that blog, I've spoken to quite a lot of people who are selling similar size companies. And yeah, it's just like you getting word out to the people who you want to buy you is one of the biggest challenges, if not the biggest. And so I would start that from the beginning now, maybe not in your first year, but after that, just like meet these people, get to know them, update them on how you're doing periodically, because that makes the whole thing a lot easier. We went in cold with a load of people, probably missed out a load of potential buyers. Like I had people email me after my blog post saying, we would have been interested. Why didn't you contact us?
Oh, no.
I think people say that, but yeah, to be honest, for the final year of it, it was kind of public info. I think if I was doing it again with the tab, I would have written a blog post saying, we're selling, get in touch. Yeah. I just don't think we had that much to lose. There are times where that would be a bad idea. Anyway, we spoke to I probably contacted 35 people, got 5 meetings, got one kind of verbal offer that didn't sound appealing enough, and got one written offer that we accepted. And basically the verbal offer was from the guys who ultimately ended up buying the company. But they were, basically someone else made an offer that was more attractive. So we sort of said, let's go with that. And this was the really big error, because the guys who were offering, who I called the lads in my blog post, didn't have the money, it transpired, but it took 7 months to learn that. So they made me this offer. It was the best price. We asked them, like we asked everyone, where's the money coming from? They said, oh, we've got funding in place from this fund. I put the fund's name into Google and it said their name and death spiral financing, which was the first warning sign. And I had a few shareholders who are kind of, I was talking to a lot, and I showed it to them and they were like, they don't have the money, don't do this. But I was just thinking, this is a better offer. I knew them a bit. They had like a slightly bad reputation from their previous venture, but I also had a bit of a personal relationship with them. We hung out a bit sort of when we were all getting started in 2012. So I went with them, and it was like everything felt wrong every time. Like they said, oh, we'll get this done by end of June, but time was dragging. They were not returning my calls. And then suddenly they said, oh, actually, it's going to take a bit longer. Here's the news story about where the money's coming from. And, the tab at that point was burning money and was running pretty low. And I think we had cash till mid-September. So my feeling was, we've committed to these guys. We don't have time to change course now. This was sort of June turning into July. And actually, I still should have just pulled the plug at that point. We could have done the deal with someone else, with the other party, Digital Box, who bought us in the end. Anyway, but I decided to stick with it. They were being really shady. It was just like every week that went by, there was another sign.
No.
Anyway, it got to August, and I somehow persuaded them to start working on the contracts with us. They'd done like no due diligence. It was just weird. The one good decision we made at that point, because we were worried about timeline, is we said to them, look, if you want to continue with this, you have to give us a deposit of 150 grand when you sign the documents with us. And they agreed. And that ultimately saved us, actually. But only after a pretty stressful period, sort of through August and into mid-September, where it looked like we were going to miss our deadline. And I decided, whatever happens, I'm not getting a situation here where we can't pay staff or whatever. Like, if we just have to close the company and give everyone notice and pay everyone properly, let's do that. And it was literally getting like a week towards that date, and it wasn't really clear if they were going to sign. I somehow got it over the line. That was probably the most stressful period, that like July to September thing. That's genuinely the worst period of my life for a 2-month period so far. Like, it was really stressful because you're worrying about people's jobs, you're worrying about the whole thing falling through. You feel it's just odd, you're being lied to. But they signed, they gave us the money, and then they had until November, the end of November, to pay. End of November came, there was a news story about where the money was coming from, and we were just at that point that we'd heard so many stories. We just said, look, guys, forget it. And just said, fuck it, we're going to move on, because we had the money from them, the 150 grand. And actually, at that point, I made a change that I probably should have made beforehand. I laid like 5 people off, which was the 3rd Christmas in a row where I've had to lay people off. Incredibly bad. It's my fault. But I made that change, and that basically meant the business was break even or making a profit. So we no longer had this thing over the business of, will it go out? Will it go bust? And I wish I'd done that before. I didn't, because people said, it meant that our revenue fell as well, even though, it made the business profitable. But people said, don't make a huge change like that before you sell the company. It'll look bad, which I think is generally true. But when it's an existential threat, I think it's better to be to have the runway. So we basically cut them off. We cut the lads off. I made some changes. I had to let some people go, which was really shit right before Christmas for them. But we, did right by them as much as we could. And then we were in a position where, okay, I've wasted a year of my life. We've been fucked around by these wankers, but the business has money. It's now a small team. It's 8 people, and there's no immediate threat. Like, I took Christmas to just relax. It was this Christmas we spent together, actually. But I don't know, you have this thing where you're able to switch in and out of how you're feeling. And to be honest, once those guys were out of my life, and once I knew the business wasn't going to go bust and people weren't going to, weren't at risk of not being paid, I felt a lot more relaxed. I was depressed about it, and I was incredibly bored of my job, but I didn't feel the panic. So that then began a new cycle of selling the business, and I did it again.
And you eventually did. How did you cope with that stress, Jack? Because lots of people that I speak to, not so much because they're selling their business, but they do find running a business can be very overwhelming. And I definitely think when you have to manage people, like you were saying, you have got to lay people off, or for whatever reason, it might not even just be that, there could be people issues, that is very stressful, as much as we think, or people look at us, and if you're an owner or, you're the business leader, they think that you're doing it and you're not feeling it, but you truly do feel it, don't you? And I just wonder how you just coped with all that, out of the workplace.
Yeah, I for me, it was, it's definitely the other people thing. Like, I never that worried about myself. I never really cared about like, is this going to look bad, or is the tab not going to have a reputation? I don't care about that, but I really felt the staff aspect, like people losing their jobs. And also for the whole year, you're keeping secrets from the staff. Like, I told them when we signed with these guys that it was happening, but you're still keeping a lot from them, that you're worried about it and people's jobs and so on. So I really hated that. It's just lonely when you can't tell anyone the truth,
That's very interesting.
And I already didn't really want to work there. So that was definitely an element of it. I didn't want to work there. But it was the dishonesties of the team, and also just the worries about them, and also shareholders. Like, I did worry. I knew they were going to get a shit result, but I didn't really want it to be absolute zero. And I think for me, it was like them not knowing. And it was like that. I can't explain how shady these guys were. And it was, I found that really difficult. So for me, I would say stress manifests itself as like not sleeping well. And then I would like take sleeping pills to try and sleep well, which is like, it's not not a direction you want to go. And thankfully I stopped doing that sort of during. I was like, this is just stupid. But yeah, I don't know. It's one of those, like, when you're with friends and stuff, I genuinely didn't really think about it and didn't really mind. But then, like, on a Sunday night at home before work, and I think, like, boozing on weekends is actually a pretty bad idea when you've got something like that going on, because the hangover just makes you feel so much worse about it. But yeah, I mean, like, Liz, my girlfriend, was really amazing support, really like crucial. So she probably suffered the most, to be honest, because she had to deal with me just like in a bad mood saying this is fucked. Yeah, I don't know, like, for me it's so on and off. It's odd, but when you're panicking about it, it's really unpleasant and you just don't sleep, and I hate not sleeping.
Totally.
Um,
It does sound an incredibly stressful time. So Jack, you've obviously had support through your journey with the TAB, i.e. with investors, shareholders. Have you had other support? You talked about people giving you advice. Some people don't reach out for advice. It sounds like you took some advice and some advice you didn't take. What do you say about people reaching out? Some people get mentors, or how from now the position you're in now.
Yeah, I did quite a bit. I mean, I had really good investors, but they're not, like, obviously they're not engaged with the day-to-day. So that's really useful for a lot of aspects. And they were really great and really, really supportive on our board. But there's definitely a gap of things that you need help with that they couldn't really offer because they're just not able to give the time. So I had a management coach who was great. I probably did like 10 to 12 sessions with him, and I really enjoyed it and found it really useful. I think the area where I felt like I had a real gap was like basically the bit in between those. It was like the hands-on business stuff, like finance, and just making sure you're just not making really stupid decisions. Like, I think I basically needed a really hands-on chairman who was a real mentor and who was giving me like a day a week. And what I got instead was shareholders who are giving you more like a day a month, and then a coach who's like dealing with really specific situations you want help with. But I didn't have that oversight, and I really felt that. And I remember feeling that way at the time, but I couldn't really think about how to solve it. And that was definitely an issue for me. Like, I look back on some of my mistakes and just cringe, because obviously now I know they're idiotic, and particularly like financial ones actually early on. And I think having basically a grown up, because we were like 26 or whatever, with all this, millions of pounds to oversee. There should have been a grown up who once a week I was checking in with and being like, these are my key decisions, these are my plans, what do you think? I wish I had that. And there were definitely people who could have done that for me. I just never set up that relationship in that way.
I think for a lot of people, we feel that we shouldn't have to ask, because we are where we are and we should just be seen to be getting on with it. I think, for a lot of people, men and women alike, I think we still have this. You set up a business, doesn't matter how big or small it is, but there's an element that you think, I shouldn't ask that question, or I shouldn't ask for help. I should to do that. Will it look like I don't know what I'm doing? If I
didn't have that so much, because like I was happy to have a coach helping me with stuff that was like maybe more taboo to get coaching with, just like managing people and like speaking to the team, like things that just made me nervous and that I just wanted to help with. But I think genuinely, like, I was just a bit lost and like what's to ask for, what it was I needed. Like, I definitely had days at the TAB where like I delegated a lot of work and I actually didn't really know what I was supposed to be doing that day. Not a lot, but like I think the stereotype is often that someone's kind of weighed under by work, whereas for me it was more like I didn't really know what we were supposed to be doing next. Like what's the growth plan? How should I be spending my time? Like, strategy is not something that comes easily to me at all. Like, I think, I've got hard skills around journalism. I generally find the kind of management skills, reasonably okay, but stuff kind of long-term thinking, strategy, because I've never really worked before. Like, I'd been journalist and this, they don't teach you this stuff at school. So that was the stuff I kind of struggled with. And I sometimes wondered about how to, like, what am I supposed to be doing? Even though I had stuff to do, it was like, what's the big stuff? And so for me, it was more of I didn't even know what questions to ask, and now I do, or some of them. I'm sure there's going to be a ton more where the same applies, but it's quite an odd problem to have. I never really talked to anyone about it. I didn't really know what to say, but that was more my issue. Rather than like pride, it was more like confusion.
Well, it's very interesting because I have another guest that I've done a podcast with, who will go out on this series as well. And it's a woman, and she said exactly the same thing, a completely different story to yours. But she said she said, I felt like in the early days, I didn't know what questions to ask. And I thought that was interesting then. And for you to say it to me today, that for me, for somebody who helps people, and I've always said quite often, it's when I talk to someone, that initial conversation, it's like that's when you see them go, that's what I wanted to ask. Oh, that's what I need to know. Oh, yeah. But it's almost like until you almost need that drawn out of you, I think. For me, it's just really, and I'm sure for a lot of people, that there's going to be a lot of people thinking the same. I don't even know I don't know the questions to ask yet.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that really helped me with that problem is reading, actually, just like business books or startup books, because they're kind of telling you what stuff to think about. I found that really useful, and I found literally I wish I'd sat down the day I became CEO and just been asked someone like, what the fuck am I supposed to be doing? Because I worked it out and stuff, but I find there's the stereotype of the startup founder who's like weighed down by work and needs to be kinder to themselves. Like I hear that a lot. I hear a lot of people who, for me, are kind of disguising a brag, where they're saying like, I need to go easier on myself and recognize I can leave fires burning. But you never really hear anyone saying, I'm actually a bit unsure about how I'm supposed to be using my time or what I'm supposed to do. And that must be pretty common. I don't know if it's more common, but when you're doing it for the first time, and I had really good people around me who were kind of taking on a lot of the operational stuff, but I struggled to kind of adapt to the sort of long-term thinking stuff.
So, Jack, great experience though, and you did sell it, do it, you got through it, you're here today.
I enjoyed it a lot, I have to say. Like it was fun. I'm glad I did it.
Now, I don't know, you said I kind of wanted to ask you a couple more before we finish the podcast. But one is, I wondered what your next venture was, or what the vision is for Jack Rivlin going forward, if you can share any of that with us, or even to the point of just saying, I'm going to do something completely different,
Yeah. No, I've started my next thing. So it's called The Upshot. It's media again, it's sports media. I mean, I unfortunately love media. It's what I like doing, journalism, writing, and also just like growing an audience, which is unfortunate because it's not necessarily a great industry. And I've always, even when I was sort of 11, wanted to be a sports journalist. So those are the two things I always wanted to do with sports media. And I just decided, I've done the tab. I've been lucky enough to get a bit of money out of it. And, I'm young enough that I don't have much in the way of an obligation. I don't have a mortgage, I don't have children. So if I'm going to do the thing I've always dreamed of doing, I think now's the time, rather than something that's more of a compromise. So at the moment, it's a newsletter about sport, and it's like focuses on gossip, controversy, drama in the world of UK sport. So it's definitely got a lot of that tab flavor. It's slightly tabloidy, and at the moment, it's a weekly newsletter. I've got 13,000 subscribers now, and then so you get it free weekly, and then people can pay to get 2 extra editions a week. So I launched the payment 2 weeks ago, and I've got 400 people paying now. So that's going to be the model. So the super fans pay, and then I'll probably serve some advertising to the people who don't pay. And yeah, I'd like it to be a sort of very a sports brand that's spicing up sports coverage, because my objection to most sports coverage is it's very dry, it's very factual and analytical. And for me, I'm actually more interested in the soap opera of sport than tactics. So I want to kind of spice up sports coverage, and I want to build a really quite niche, jokey media brand that has a real cult following of fans. It's never going to be huge scale, but I want people to really love it. So yeah, I've been doing it for a while now, and I took some time off, of course, post tab, and it's obviously been strange with lockdowns. You kind of want to spend a month on a beach, but I couldn't do that. But I kind of started this slowly rather than just doing nothing. I started this and was sort of doing it once a week, which was really nice because it gave me a bit of purpose. And yeah, I'm really enjoying it. So I think that's my vision. I mean, I'd obviously like to do more things in future as well, but I'm not like looking to do this for 3 years and then sell it. It's something that I want to do much more me. And I think, I want to avoid, maybe I'll raise some investment at some point, but I want to avoid, ending up owning a tiny slice of it, which is what happened with the tab.
Yeah. So Jack, do you want to just give everyone who's listening and watching some other information on how to join how to get hold of the Upshot and become one of your subscribers?
Yeah. If you just go to the website, you can sign up, which is www.upshot.email. And then there's a sign up form there. That's the simplest way.
Fab. And I presume they can follow on all the social media channels.
Yeah, I mean, it's an email newsletter, so that the main content you have to do there. I'm doing a bit of Twitter, but I'm actually staying very focused on email. So best to sign up there.
So you get it by email, everyone. So yes, go along and sign up. Now, Jack, you again, but I just love to ask everybody before they leave. I mean, you've obviously had quite a lot of learnings, but I always like to say to my guests, is there one, I can stretch it a bit, one learning or piece of advice you would give to anyone out there, either starting up their own business or they might even be in business, that you can share?
Yeah, I think I've got two.
Two's fine.
Yeah, I'll make them really short. Okay, number one, keep costs low. 3 words. Spend less money. It's amazing how much you can waste. Like, if you don't have a strong case for how spending some money is going to earn you more money, then don't do it.
Yeah.
Which was a huge learning for me. We wasted so much. And then the second one is, I think it's really easy early on to focus on things other than getting customers. I read a really good book that said 80% of your time should be on getting new customers in the early stage till you've got about £1 million of revenue. So that's a huge learning for me. I think, spend all your time on that because it's easy to get distracted by logo, business cards, setting up the company, all the kind of fun stuff. But getting customers is just absolutely the key. Those are my 2 big takeaways probably from the whole experience.
Oh, good ones. I like it. Of course, sometimes having your logo and a bit of marketing or a bit of branding behind you helps you gather those new customers because
it's
you need something to kind of pin it on or be a part of or whatever. But I totally agree with you. All that can be evolved as you get the money in and you get more customers.
Well, I'm thinking of myself redesigning our logo like 50 times when I should have been out trying to meet advertisers. It's probably quite a personal. Obviously, you need all that stuff. Can't really start without it.
I would agree with that. Listen, Jack, thank you so much. Listen, will you come back and maybe it's time and tell us how it's going? Because I'm really keen now to
I'd love to
come back and kind of update everyone on what's going on and how you're doing.
I'd love to. Yeah, thanks so much. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, thank you for being so honest. It's a good, I'm glad you've come through it. Amazing experience, and look, every success with the Upshot.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Thanks, Jack.